Crashes are one of the main parts about F1, and today I am going to be reacting to some of the worst crashes in F1 history.
Grand Prix. At the 1967 Monaco Grand Prix, Lorenzo Bandini was trailing in second place behind Denny Hulme when he lost control of the vehicle and crashed.
Now Bandini. Bandini's crashed!
Good Lord, look at that.
So he didn't go into the harbour, but he's done a Romain Grosjean about 40 or 50 years before Grosjean even did what he did.
The car, it looks like it's upside down, Phil.
The car flipped and its fuel tank broke, which resulted in the car bursting into flames. Marshall struggled with rescuing Bandini as the flames constantly grew and made the task all the more difficult. Although Bandini was eventually pulled out of the vehicle, he had still sustained third-degree burns. He was taken to the hospital, but sadly he passed away 3 days later.
That just shows how much more dangerous F1 used to be compared to it is now. Back then, if a car touches anything, it's just going to catch fire immediately.
31 years of age. Gilles Villeneuve, the 1982 Belgian Grand Prix. Near the end of the qualifier session of this edition of the Belgian Grand Prix, Gilles Villeneuve aimed to improve his position and lap time, so he attempted to cut another racer. There was clearly confusion as to which side he should complete the maneuver. He went right and hit the vehicle he attempted to pass.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure in this crash, it was that bad that Villeneuve actually came out of his car, and if you look closely, you can see him fly across the screen and it's horrible.
Villeneuve's car flipped several times, and the subsequent impact was so devastating, it resulted in Villeneuve being launched out of the vehicle. He was rushed to the hospital, but hours later it was announced that he had passed away. Jules Bianchi.
Villeneuve probably would have gone on to be one of the F1 greats, and it's such a shame we lost him so young. To be fair, to this day, he is still remembered, and a track in Canada is named after Gilles Villeneuve.
The 2014 Japanese Grand Prix. In F1 races, one crash often leads to another, but none have been under such unusual circumstances. During a lap of this race, as a result of weather conditions, Sauber's Adrian Sutil would go off the track and hit a wall. A crane was used by marshals to remove the vehicle. During the removal process, Marussia's Jules...
Every time I watch that back, it makes me cringe so much. Oh, that's actually horrible.
Bianchi wound up driving directly into the crane. He was unconscious and was subsequently placed in intensive care. He later passed away as a result of the head injuries he sustained during the accident.
Yeah, so that crash is basically the reason why we've got the Halo now. And I remember when the Halo came in, no one liked it. Everyone complained about how ugly it was, but since it came in, it saved so many lives. I'm not sure if some of them crashes will be on this list, but yeah, the Halo has saved so many lives. But it's such a shame that a really bad accident like this one that just happened now, you saw, is the reason why so many lives have been saved from one device.
Will be much missed in the Formula One paddock.
Ronnie Peterson, the 1978 Italian Grand Prix. Crashing the vehicle he was meant to drive at the race during a practice session, Team Lotus's Ronnie Peterson was forced to drive an older model instead. Along with his vehicle facing technical difficulties, the main race began as the flag was dropped before all the cars were in their respective positions. The ensuing havoc and confusion caused by the error resulted in Peterson's vehicle colliding with a McLaren driven by James Hunt. Peterson's Lotus would then hit a barrier and burst into flames. Hunt and several crew members were able to get Peterson out of the vehicle and he was rushed to the hospital. The next morning, Peterson was pronounced dead as a result of a fat embolism. Romain Grosjean, the 2020 Bahrain Grand Prix.
Oh, so this crash that you're about to see now, this crash shows just how much safer F1 is now compared to the 60s, the 70s, and even the 80s. Obviously, as you've just seen in the crash before and the first crash, there's so much fire, and the same thing's about to happen here, but Grosjean actually survives this just because of how much safer F1 is now compared to back then.
During the first lap of this race, Romain Grosjean's vehicle clipped Daniel Kvyat's AlphaTauri's left front wheel. Grosjean's car was sent reeling and crashed into a metal barrier. It was sliced in half and caught on fire.
That's extraordinary. Yeah.
Just the car
It's gone through the barrier, you see. The car's gone through the barrier.
Despite all odds, Grosjean was able to remove his race.
Look, you can see his car there in the middle of the screen. Right round here. That is his car. And he was sat there in a fireball for 30 seconds and only came out with a burnt hand.
Race boot, escape the vehicle, and ultimately save himself. Surprisingly, he left relatively unscathed, having only suffered minor.
Look there in the middle. Where these two guys are here, that's where Grosjean is, right in the middle of that fire. Like, how did he get out of that with just a few burns?
Burns and spraining his left ankle. Having only been inside the vehicle a mere 28 seconds after the crash had occurred, it is truly a miracle that he survived and was able to escape an almost certain fate.
I thought about my kids and I said, no, I cannot die today.
Alberto Ascari, the 1955 Monaco Grand Prix. Trailing behind Sterling Moss in this race.
I'm sure this is the crash where the car goes into the harbour. If I'm wrong here, I'm going to look stupid because I've already got it wrong before. But yeah, I'm sure this is the crash where he goes into the harbour.
Race for the lead. Alberto Ascari was in luck when the engine of Moss's Mercedes broke down. The opportunity to take the lead, however, was missed, as Ascari's vehicle swerved out of control, crashed through a barrier and directly into the Mediterranean Sea.
Ascari has overshot the chicane. The car has somersaulted straight into the harbour.
The car sank, but fans breathed a sigh of relief when Ascari appeared on the surface. He was subsequently rescued and hauled out of the water.
A motor launch has picked Ascari up, and he is brought over to the harbour side where an ambulance is waiting.
Despite the harsh nature of the crash, Ascari came out of the whole ordeal with a broken nose and some bruises. Wolfgang von Trips.
I'm sure Ascari died a few weeks later as well, just after this crash.
The 1961 Italian Grand Prix. On the second lap of the Italian Grand Prix race in 1961, two cars on the track came in contact with one another. While one of the cars, driven by Jim Clark, came to a halt, the other, driven by Wolfgang von Trips, was spinning out of control and struck a section of spectators, 15 of whom were killed. Von Trips was thrown out of the vehicle and did not survive the accident. Despite this horrific sequence of events, the race continued, and Von Trips' teammate, Phil Hill, went on to win the race. Some drivers only became aware of the crash and its severity after the race, leaving many to question why it had not been stopped. Niki Lauda, the 1976 German Grand Prix. One of the greatest and biggest stars to ever get behind the wheel. This Austrian legend was involved in one of the most horrific accidents in F1 history. During the second lap of the race, out of nowhere, Lauda's car swerved out of control and caught on fire. Several drivers and staff assisted in pulling Lauda out of the vehicle, but despite escaping, he received severe burns all over.
And the initial prognosis was that he had little chance of survival. The nature of his injuries was such that a priest was called to administer the last rites.
Even though he was in critical condition and went into a coma, Lauda remarkably survived the ordeal, and
to survive that crash, especially back in them days, was an absolute miracle. Considering all the other crashes we've just seen in the 60s, the 70s and the 80s where the cars caught fire, no one else survived. However, somehow Niki Lauda did. Bearing in mind, the Nürburgring at that time was probably the worst track to crash at because it was so big. And there probably wasn't even that many access roads for ambulances or anything like that to get to, so it probably took them a while to get to Lauda. So yeah, the fact he survived that crash is an absolute miracle, and I have no clue how he did.
Would make an incredible comeback after 6 weeks, and he later went on to win 2 more world titles. Ronnie Ratzenberger, the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix.
At the conclusion of this afternoon's final qualifying session for tomorrow's San Marino Grand Prix, I sadly have to report that the news is bad.
During a qualifying session of the San Marino Grand Prix in 1994, the nose wing of this 31-year-old's vehicle had gotten detached. The car subsequently went off the track and slammed directly into a barrier. Ratzenberger had suffered a skull fracture so severe, he was pronounced dead shortly after medical staff arrived at the site of the crash.
It was the first time that we have to face a dead Formula One driver for our generation. The whole atmosphere was very heavy that afternoon, and everybody was thinking about what are we doing here, or what's the point,
Worst of all, many believed the tragedy could have been prevented. as Ratzenberger was aware of the issue with his vehicle, but opted to complete another lap instead. Unfortunately, this wouldn't be the last tragedy to take place at the 1994 Grand Prix in San Marino. Before we continue, be sure to...
No, we don't want to listen to that. We don't want to see Watch Mojo adverts. Subscribe to my channel, not Watch Mojo. Cheers, guys. Right.
Ayrton Senna, the 1994 San Marino
crash.
Grand Prix.
This actually makes me sad for this.
My goodness! I just saw it plunge off to the right. What on earth happened there? I don't know.
On lap 7 of the main race, Brazilian and 3-time champ Ayrton Senna had taken a comfortable lead over Benetton's Michael Schumacher. At one point coming up on the corner, he attempted to make a turn, only for his vehicle to skid off the track and crash into a wall. The accident was so devastating the car's front wheel and nose were torn off.
Ayrton ran out of luck. He did not have a broken bone in his body. He did not have any bruising.
That just makes that crash so much worse. The fact he didn't have a broken bone, bruise, not anything like that. He died just because something hit his head. And I've heard that if a car was anything as much as like 6 centimeters lower or 6 inches lower, he would have walked out of that completely unharmed, which just makes the whole thing even more tragic.
If that piece of assembly would have gone 6 inches higher or 6 inches lower, he would have walked back to the paddock.
Although he was pulled out of the vehicle, he was in critical condition, and despite...
Right, well, there's your top 10 F1 crashes of all time. If you want to see more reaction videos like this, subscribe to the channel. What do you think is the worst F1 crash you have ever seen? Thank you so much for watching as always, and I'll see you all in the next one.